Continuing on with Unified English Braille and Introduction, this is part 5, and we have just one more video to go, so we're reaching the end. Part 5 today is going to talk about short forms, contraction preference when we have a choice of being able to use one or two or more contractions. Capitalization, which is a little bit different in UEB, and something new called line mode, and Typeforms, which is like italics and bold and that sort of thing. First, short forms. We can use short forms whenever the word is standing alone. There's that standing alone again. I told you we'd be using that all throughout the series. So whether it doesn't matter what it means for the short form or how it's pronounced, whether it's a proper name or something made up, we can use it as long as it's standing alone. We can use it. Of course, there are some other rules that we have to apply. We can use them within a longer word, provided that the longer word is also standing alone, and that longer word meets one of two conditions. It either appears in Appendix 1. There are 3 appendices in the UEB codebook. The first one deals with short forms, and it's a list of words that can be used with the short form in it. Or, if it doesn't appear there, then it has to satisfy Rule 10.9.3. Rule 10.9.3 is, next slide, that there are 10 short forms with special rules. These short forms are blind, braille, children, first, friend, good, great, letter, little, and quick. So we still have all the same short forms that we did before. We're just going to be seeing them, again, just like the other contractions, we're going to be seeing them more than we used to. And there are some other rules that we have to apply now. So any of those 10 short forms words we can use within a longer word, even if it isn't on the short form list, as long as that word is standing alone and that any restrictions for that particular short form are met. In a nutshell, braille and great can be used wherever they occur, so there aren't a lot of restrictions for those. As long as they're standing alone, that's the big key. Remember that. Children we can use when it's not followed by a vowel or a Y. I can't for the life of me think of when it would be followed by a vowel or a Y, but apparently there are some circumstances when that could be. And then we can't use the short form. We have to spell it out using CH and EN contractions instead. The rest of them, the other 8, blind, first, friend, good, letter, little, and quick, we can use if it begins the word and is not followed by a vowel or a Y. So they get a little bit more restrictive as you go down the screen. Braille and great can be used wherever they occur, as long as it's standing alone. Children can be used wherever it occurs, beginning, middle, or end of a word, as long as it's standing alone and children is not followed by a vowel or a Y. Then the remaining 8 we can use only if they're at the beginning of a word and they are not followed by that vowel or a Y. And again, you might think, when would that ever happen? But there must be circumstances. Remember, this is an international code, so who knows? Maybe there's some slang word or something that could meet that circumstance. And that's all I'm going to go into with short forms. Short forms actually have quite a few considerations, which I'm not going to get into in an introductory series, but if you are going to use short forms, be sure to study those rules in the codebook. We'll move on to contraction preference now, and we should give preference to the group sign, the group of letters, which causes a word to occupy the fewest number of cells. So if there's a choice, we would, in advanced, if there is, we could use ED or we could use ANCE. Using ED would take up more cells, so we're going to use the ANCE contraction there. Alright, we could use AR and then GH, but that's going to take more cells, so we're going to use A and then the contraction for right. Coherence, we could use HERE, but that takes up more cells, or we could use ER or EN possibly. I'm guessing that, so we have kind of a choice of 3 different ways of doing it, but the ENCE way is going to use the fewest number of cells. Thence we could use THE, but that's going to take more cells. Vengeance, we could use EA, again ANCE is it's going to take fewer cells. And whether we could use THE or THER or whatever, but using with and ER uses only two cells. If that is taken care of, if either way we'll use the same number of cells, then we go to the next consideration. We would use the strong group sign in preference to the lower group sign. So that's why we use EAR and in EAR words, that letter sequence, we would almost always use the AR instead of EA in that situation. Saccharin, we would use CH, that's the strong contraction. There's a dot on the top, on the bottom, on the left, and on the right, as opposed to the double C contraction. Except, we use the strong and lower group signs in preference to the initial letter contractions and the final letter group signs if they do not waste space. So we can use the strong contraction group sign, of course. That's the first preference. We can even use lower group signs if we have a choice between a lower group sign or an initial letter contraction or a final letter contraction. So because those take up two cells by themselves already. So adhered, instead of using the HERE contraction there, that's an initial letter contraction, we're going to use a strong contraction, ER and ED instead. Component, we could use ONE, but that's an initial letter contraction. EN is preferred. Excuse me, effulgent is going to use the FF contraction and the EN as opposed to, I don't know what else. Heredity, we're going to use ER and ED instead of HERE. Parthenon, we're going to use AR and TH instead of PART because that's an initial letter contraction. And words that end in ONED, we're going to use the ED contraction instead of the ONE contraction because of this rule. Except, if, for instance, you have the final letter group sign for ENCE in letter sequences ENCA, ENCED, or ENCER, then we will use the ENCE contraction. So in Clemenceau, we will use that, ENCE instead of EA, or EN and EA. Commenced, we will use the ENCE instead of ED, even though ED is strong. Influenceable, we'll be using the ENCE contraction instead of the EN and EA contraction. Of course, BLE doesn't exist anymore. And silencer, we'll use the ENCE instead of EN or ER. So if you, one more screen, sorry. If we select the group sign which more nearly approximate the usual pronunciation of the word, and which does not distort the form of the word. Now that sounds pretty subjective to me. Who decides the usual pronunciation, especially since we're talking multiple countries here with different pronunciations of words, or even regions? Who decides what the usual pronunciation is, or what decides when a form of a word is distorted or not? I don't know. Hopefully someday we'll have some more clarification on that. But for some words that show this, then asthma, we would use the TH contraction, not the ST contraction. Gingham, we would use the ING, not the GH. Posthumous, we would use ST instead of TH. Stronghold, we've talked about that already. I believe we use do not use the GH there because it's two words of a compound word, and also H is aspirated there. Whereas we're going to use where as opposed to ER, like WH, ER, and EA. Wherever, we're going to use the EVER contraction though. I almost said however, that would have been a pun. Instead of using the where contraction there. And chemotherapy, believe it or not, we're not going to use the contraction for mother, MOTHER. That's kind of obvious. So if you think about this, if you'll forgive me flipping backwards through the screens, sometimes I'm weird. If I go through things backwards, I will understand it better. So we just went through all the exceptions. Now let's go back the other way, and I'll try to explain this as clearly as I can. because it might help you, or explain it to your students if you're a vision teacher. So first, you can look at a word, and if there's a choice between one contraction or the other, is it going to wreck the pronunciation or the usual form of the word? If not, then we can go back. Do we have a situation where we have ENCA, ENCED, or ENCER? No, we don't. So the next consideration then would be, are there any lower signs or strong group signs that we can use in place of the initial letter or final letter group signs? If not, then it's a choice between strong group signs or lower group signs. We're going to take the group sign, or strong group sign rather. And then the last consideration, if none of that comes into play, then we just consider whether it's going to take up more cells or not. So I don't know if that will help you or confuse you. Hopefully it helped. Go ahead and work through it backwards instead of going through all the exceptions. And now I'll jump ahead to the next screen that we were coming up to. And let's talk about bridging then. We're not going to use a group sign which would bridge the words which make up an unhyphenated compound word. I just mentioned that. So in bottleneck, we're not going to use EN between bottle and neck. Cart horse, we're not going to use TH. Dumbbell, we're not going to use the double B. Grasshopper, not using SH. Kettle drum, not using ED. Longhand, not using GH. Northeast, not using THE for that. Painstaking, we're not using ST. Pineapple, not using EA. Rawhide, not using WH. Storeroom, not using ER. Stronghold, not using GH. I think we just mentioned that on a previous screen. And tea room, we are using the EA because that belongs to the word tea, and not using AR because that would bridge the two words of the compound word. Word division, just a quick note about that. Basically, we're not doing it. It's preferred to just bring the whole word down to the next line, and some people might think, oh, that's wasting space, but again, we're not talking about wasting space these days. We're talking about clarity, and so we're just bringing the whole word down. And besides, it takes a lot of time to find out where we should divide words, and in these days we want Braille instantly, or as instantly as possible, so we're just bringing it down to the next line. But if you must, because the word division itself is being studied, or there's a definite line break in print there for this purpose of studying it, like line numbered poetry or Shakespeare or something like that. So if you must, there are a whole bunch of rules regarding when you can and cannot use various contractions, and I'm not going to go into that just now because this is an introductory course. So let's move on to something more interesting, which is capitalization. So capitalization is in some ways very similar to what we had before, thank goodness, but there are some new twists to it. The capital letter indicator is still .6, thank goodness. Capital's word indicator, what we used to call double caps, is .66. So that's going to capitalize the entire symbol sequence for, excuse me, a letter sequence, as we'll see in a moment. Then we have something new called Capital's passage indicator, and that is three cells of dots, 3 cells of .6. So we'll talk about that. And passage always has to be terminated. So there is the capital's terminator. You'll notice that the capital indicators are prefixes. They're all on the right-hand part of the cell. The capital terminator consists of .6 prefix and the terminating .3. So the capital's terminator looks like our termination sign that we used to use for everything, but in UEB it's specific to capitalization only. It's what's being terminated, which is .6, and then the .3 is the indicating termination dots. So we have .6 and .3, and it only terminates capitalization. Other terminators that terminate other things will be are constructed the same way, and we'll see how those work later on. So capital letters are just capital letters. I'm not going to go into that, but capitalized words are a little bit different in UEB. The effect of the capitalized word indicator carries through letters only. And they can be any kind of letter, whether it's a regular typeface letter, a modified letter, meaning an accented letter, or a ligature letter. Anything else terminates the capitals word mode, including a single capital indicator, because that's not a letter. So anything that isn't a letter is going to terminate capitalization. So we have TV Ontario. Believe it or not, technically the correct way to do it before was to capitalize TVO, then terminate the capitalization, and then carry on with NTARIO. That totally disrupted the whole reading sequence. And so some people, myself actually included, actually kind of fudged that and just used the single capital indicator and called it at that. I mean, it was fairly obvious from context. Here in UEB, it's official. We can do it. So we have, you break the words where they logically should be broken. So this is not TVO, Ontario. This is TV Ontario. So we have the capitalized word indicator there with 2 cells of .6 for TV, and then the single capital indicator terminates the fully capitalized mode. It only capitalizes the O following it, and the rest of that letter sequence then is understood to be in lowercase. McGraw-Hill, we have capital M, C, then we have our capitalized word indicator. In my opinion, it really should be capitalized symbol sequence or letter sequence indicator, but it's called the word indicator. So it's a little bit confusing because sometimes it isn't actually a word that you're capitalizing, it's just a few, a sequence of letters. Anyway, I don't know if that will make sense, but we have capital GRA. The hyphen is not a letter, so that terminates capitalized word mode, meaning we have to start it up again for the rest of it, Hill. And UW Madison, we have capital UW. The hyphen terminates capitalized word mode, so we have to start it up again for Madison with only a single capital indicator there, and the rest is lowercase. This means that things are, the next 2 examples show that things are the opposite of how they used to be. Okayed, meaning OK apostrophe D, capitalized word mode there, capital .6, OK. An apostrophe is not a letter, so it terminates capitalized mode. D is understood to be lowercase. However, the next example, McDonald's, capital M, C is lowercase, start capitalized word mode there with Donald, apostrophe terminates. We have to start capitalization again for just the S. That's exactly the opposite of how it used to be. We used to need to terminate the capitalized word after the or before the apostrophe to make sure that the D was understood to be lowercase, and in McDonald's we would not need to start up capitalized word mode again for the S. So just the opposite. Be aware that again, anything other than a letter is going to terminate capitalization in word mode in UEB. A passage, if you recall, is 3 or more symbol sequences. It can include anything. Spaces, symbols, letters, indicators, anything. A passage must be explicitly terminated, and until you do, it is going to carry on forever. So a passage is 3 or more symbol sequences, and it may include non-alphabetic symbols, meaning non-letters. A capitalized passage is terminated by the capitals terminator immediately following the last affected symbol sequence. So we have here an example: caution, colon, space, wet, space, paint, exclamation point. None of that interferes with the capitalization in a passage mode. So we have 3 cells of capitalized, 3 cells of .6, and then it's understood to be capitalized letters until we explicitly end it at the end with .6, what's being terminated, and a .3. So the colon, the spaces, nothing affects that at all. This, however, by the way, comes in really handy. I'm really pleased that they came up with this. I wish we would have done this years ago. This is really nice when you have really long passages of capitalized words, like a teacher saying the exam is next week, or a warranty statement in an appliance manual, or what have you. This really cuts down on space and helps readability, because quite honestly, reading double caps for each and every word before was a royal pain. So I'm pleased to see that. Just to clarify though, a capitalized passage, we have to be careful what exactly is meant by that. So if there are multiple elements, an element meaning a literary chunk of something, in a capitalized series of paragraphs, for instance, or listed items, each paragraph would be an element, or each of the items in the list would be an element. Each item is preceded by the capitalized passage indicator, and the capitals mode is terminated only at the end of the final text element, not after each element. So if we had a conversation, say, and two people are shouting at each other for whatever reason, each paragraph then needs to be reinstated with a capitalized passage indicator, but you don't terminate it until the very end, at the end of the conversation. So you see there, it's capitalized mode. Capitalized passage mode is only terminated at the end of the last line. And also notice that capitalization terminator, you could put it after there, you could put it after the exclamation point, you could put it after the inner quote, as I did, or the final double quote. As long as you've terminated it somewhere in there, you can do pretty much what you want. Just try to be consistent within a transcription. I would say putting it after the word there before the exclamation point would be a little bit cumbersome, but you can, it's not wrong, as I understand it, to do it that way if you wanted to. Just be consistent. And here we have a list. Be sure to bring, those are instructions, so that is one separate element. It's capitalized in passage mode, and then it's terminated as something separate. Then the list then starts capitalized passage mode, and each element is again reinstated as continuing on with the passage. It's just a reminder for the reader as it's going along, but it isn't terminated until the very last item. Not all the things that are one after another, though, are part of the same literary chunk, not the same conversation or a list or something like that. So where the text elements do not constitute a continuous passage, then each text element has to be capitalized separately. So here we have 3 centered headings, and each one is capitalized in passage because each one happens to be 3 or more words, and each one is terminated before starting up the next one. If, however, it's a single heading that just happens to wrap around, that's one element, and so you put that in capitalized passage mode at the beginning, terminate it at the end. You don't need to reinstate the capitalized passage mode for the second line because it's still the same one heading. Sometimes it would be correct to use either the capitalized letters or capitalized word mode. In that case, you would use the method that retains the usual Braille form, best conveys the meaning, and gives the most consistency. So in the example of CDs, suppose you have capital C, capital D, lowercase s. Normally, CD is grade 1 mode indicator. Capital word mode, capital C, D. We don't individually capitalize the C and the D. So when we have CDs, it'll take some more space, and it seems a little bit more cumbersome to have grade 1 mode indicator, capital CD, terminate the capitals word mode, and then S. However, if we were to capitalize C and D individually in that instance, it doesn't look or feel like CD usually looks or feels. And so we're going to keep the usual Braille form and use the grade 1 indicator, capital CD, terminate S. for that. Just emphasizing, the capitals terminator is placed after the final capitalized letter. So if we have initials of writer in all caps, we're going to terminate that before the slash, not after. And then we have the initials of secretary, which is just all in lowercase. The next sentence is kind of interesting. The two CEOs met in our CEO's office. So the first CEOs means plural CEO. There are two or more CEOs. The second one is an apostrophe S because it's an office belonging to one of those CEOs. So the two CEOs, the first one is capital word indicator there, CEO. We have to terminate it for the S. The second one, we again have the capitals word indicator there, but again the apostrophe terminates that mode because it's not a letter, and so we don't have to have anything indicating that the S is lowercase because the apostrophe does that for us already. The capitals terminator may precede or follow punctuation, we've already seen that, and other terminators, but it is best to close paired punctuation and indicators in reverse order of opening. And so we have this phrase, "It's a hoax!" exclamation point, space, parentheses, April Fool, exclamation point, another parentheses. So that whole thing is a passage. None of the punctuation or spacing affects it at all. We can terminate it anywhere we like after the final letter, but because we have those parentheses there, we have, instead of having terminating the capitals before closing the parentheses, the parenthetical phrase there, that's putting things all out of order. And so we opened capitalization first, and then we had a parenthesis. So we're going to close the parenthesis, that parenthetical phrase first, and then finish with the capitalization terminator there. Moving on to a brand new topic, line mode. Now UEB says we should use line mode for things like, well, anytime there's a print visible horizontal line. So column headings, it says we should use it for box lines, note separation lines, sentence diagramming, tic-tac-toe, organizational charts, and family trees. Now BANA is our Braille authority in North America, and they need to tell us when and how much of this we're going to be actually using, because line mode affects formatting, and each country can decide their own rules on formatting. And that's what happened with box lines. So we're not using here in the United States line mode for box lines, even though it says so to do so in the UEB code. We are going to use the same box lines that we have been using since 2011 instead, because it deals with formatting. Also, BANA has said we're not using line mode for mathematical or scientific diagrams. We are also not using any vertical line symbols for boxed text. So actually for boxed text, then we're not using horizontal lines or vertical lines as stated in UEB. We're going to be using the box lines that we have been using since 2011 here in the United States. There are a whole bunch of symbols that are used in line mode. I've just picked out a few of the basic ones here to put on this screen just to kind of introduce you to them. Basic symbols would be then the horizontal line mode indicator. So every horizontal line in line mode, it starts with .5 and then a cell of 2.5. And then after that tells you what kind of horizontal line it is. But the line mode itself is started with .5 and then 2.5. And then there's a single horizontal line segment that is continuing on with dots 2.5. If it's a double horizontal line segment, then we have 2, 3, 5, 6. After that, those two cells of .5 and 2.5. Or if it's a triple horizontal line segment, then we start off again with .5, that's 2.5, and the rest of the line uses the full cell. And again, this is according to UEB. BANA is going to have to lay down the particulars for us on how we're going to use it here in the United States. that's all I'm going to say for line mode, because until Banna makes a determination on that. I just want you to be aware of it. Moving on then to typeforms. Typeforms are characteristics of a font, and there are 4 predefined typeform indicators in UEB. They follow the prefix and root construction, just as all of our symbols have so far. And in the code book, it looks like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to learn 16 different symbols for all these typeforms. But no, really, all you need to learn is there are 4 prefixes and 4 roots, and then you just put them together. So we have a certain prefix to indicate italics, and it's .46. Hey, that's familiar. Bold is .45. It looks kind of like a B, but on the wrong side of the, or the opposite side of the cell, not wrong, but the opposite side of the cell. Underline is .456, and script is just .4. The root then tells the extent of that typeform, so whether it's going to be a symbol, a word, a passage, or there's that .3 for the terminator. And there's a nice little chart in the ABCs of UEB book by Constance Ristor. It's on page 31. And I like this chart a lot better than section 9 of the rules of the Unified English Braille, because again, the rules of UEB just list all 16 symbols, and it looks very intimidating, whereas this chart, I think, lays it out much better. So you'll notice that going across the chart on the top row there for italics, the prefix is .46, and then we show the extent of it going across. Whether it's for a symbol, we would use .23. If it's a word, we would only use .2. Passage uses 2356, and the terminator uses that .3. So it's always the prefix, meaning italics, and then the extent of it is the root. Next row for bold, we have .56, and then showing the extent. Underline, 456, shows the extent. Script, .4, show the extent. And then going down, if you notice, if we have a symbol, we always use the same root for a symbol. The prefix is going to tell you what's happening with that symbol, whether it's italic, bold, underline, or script. The same thing for word, the passage, or of course the termination indicators. If we need anything other than those 4, which unfortunately means so far highlighting and double underlining, all those wonderful things that were introduced to us in Formats 2011, those have gone bye-bye. We can't use those anymore. So if we need something besides the 4 that we just talked about, italic, bold, underline, or script, then we have things that transcriber defined typeform. And we have 5 additional symbols that we can use for whatever it is that we need. So these aren't going to be consistent from one transcription to another, but within a transcription they should definitely be consistent. So we use these prefixes. You note that these are prefixes. They're all, the first cell is the dots on the right part of the cell, and then the other prefix is the dots 3, 4, 5, 6, so it's a 2-cell prefix. We still have to show the extent after this, so it's going to be a 3-cell configuration. First the prefix, and then the root showing the extent, whether it's a symbol, a word, or a passage, or the termination. And we do this in order. We can't just pick one of these that we like. We have to do this in order from top to bottom. So the first time we need something in a transcription that is not italic, bold, underline, or script, we're going to use the first transcriber-defined typeform, which is .4, and then 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we have to show the extent. This will have to be listed on the special symbols page, of course, or explained in a transcriber's note right before it occurs. And then we can go ahead and use that. I lost my train of thought there for a second. Then if we need another one, then we need a second transcriber-defined typeform. Oh, I remember what I was just going to say to you. When you are listing these in the special symbols or a transcriber's note, don't describe it as the first transcriber-defined typeform. That is transcriber talk. It means nothing to the Braille reader. Call it what it is. Suppose you need it for blue type. You are going to call .4, 3, 4, 5, 6, you'll say that is the indicator for blue type. Don't call it the first transcriber defined typeform, okay? So if we need something else, say we need yellow, or double underline or something like that. Then we move on down to the second transcriber defined type form. Again, calling it double underlined or yellow highlighting or what have you. Do not call it second transcriber defined type form. That's lingo. Okay, and you just keep moving down the list for as many as you need. And hopefully you don't need more than that. If you do, then there's another way out, but I'm not going to talk about that just now. Small capitals are the same height as lowercase letters, and so, but sometimes it's just a visual way of showing abbreviations or Roman numerals. In that case, we can just use the capitalized word indicator for that, 2 cells of dots 6. But if it really means something, it's an emphasis or a distinction, as in a headline or some written material or something like that. There's a reason for it to be in small caps, and it's important for the reader to know that it is in small caps. Then you would use one of those transcriber defined type forms if you feel it's necessary. Otherwise, you can still use the full caps or the capitalized word mode. But if the distinction is needed and you feel it's necessary, then you can use a transcriber defined type form. In this example, it's presumed that that 4 other type forms have already been used, because this is using the 5th transcriber defined type form. Yes, the 5th transcriber defined type form. And so we're using that, and we're using the passage indicator there, because earthquake kills thousands is 3 or more symbol sequences. And then we terminate it with the same transcriber defined indicator there and the dot 3. And that's it for this session. See what you can do with the practice for session 5. And we'll see you for the last session, part 6, in just a little while. Thank you.